Imagine finding a legal loophole so massive that just by simply changing your zip code, you essentially hand yourself $600 million in cash.
Right. Just a casual 600 million.
Yeah, casual. And then imagine taking that cash and using it to fund this wild plan to move literally all of Earth's heavy industry into outer space.
Which is a real plan, by the way.
It is.
Yeah.
And while you're doing that, you're simultaneously building an artificial intelligence that's designed to compress, a decade of human engineering into a single afternoon.
Right.
So, welcome to a brand new deep dive. Today, our mission is to really unpack the current era of Jeff Bezos.
Yeah, we're looking at a guy who has completely transitioned from basically figuring out how to put paperback books into cardboard boxes in a Seattle garage to someone who is now actively trying to reprogram the physical world.
Exactly. The physical world, the cosmos, and the fundamental speed of human invention itself.
It's a huge shift.
It really is.
Yeah.
So whether you are an entrepreneur looking for a blueprint on scale, or you're just, insanely curious about how a single person with virtually unlimited resources shapes the future, this deep dive is for you.
Absolutely. And to really map out this whole transition, we are drawing from a massive and frankly fascinating stack of sources today.
Yeah, we've got a lot to get through.
We do. We're pulling from recent financial reporting on his unprecedented stock liquidations and these massive new venture capital rounds. We've got historical and current Wikipedia documentation tracking the Billionaire space race.
Which is all drama in itself.
Oh, totally. Plus, we are looking at internal Amazon shareholder letters spanning all the way from 1997 to Andy Jassy's most recent updates. And finally, some deep dive case studies examining his specific brand of transformational leadership.
Okay, let's unpack this.
Yeah.
Because I was looking at the timeline of his recent financial moves and, well, to understand where Bezos is going, you first have to grasp the sheer mind-boggling scale of how he operates today. I mean, the math of his personal life completely mirrors the scale of his business ambitions. And nothing illustrates the pure mechanics of his wealth management quite like his recent relocation to Miami.
Yeah, it really is a masterclass in strategic wealth optimization.
Yeah.
I mean, for nearly 3 decades, the identity of Jeff Bezos and the identity of Amazon were just inextricably tied to Seattle.
Washington State, right.
Right. That was the headquarters. That was the fortress. But then, late in 2023, he announced he was moving his primary residence back to Miami, Florida.
Which is actually where he spent his high school years, right?
Exactly. And on the surface, the PR messaging positioned this as a lifestyle choice.
Yeah.
Getting closer to his parents, enjoying better weather, being nearer to the Cape Canaveral operations for Blue Origin.
Sure. Sounds reasonable enough.
Right. But when you look at the ledger, the financial timing of this move reveals a much more calculating mechanism at work.
The math here blew my mind. Because in 2023, Washington State introduced a new 7% capital gains tax.
Yes, and that is the key detail.
Yeah, and this specifically targeted the sale of stocks and bonds exceeding $250,000. Now, for your average high earner, that is a substantial tax hit.
It's significant.
But for Jeff Bezos, who had already filed his intention to sell up to 50 million shares of Amazon stock over the next year, that 7% tax isn't just a hit. It represents a bleeding of capital on a scale that could fund a mid-sized nation.
Precisely. You have to look at how capital gains realization works. Until he sells the stock, the wealth is unrealized. It's just, paper wealth tied up in the market cap of Amazon.
Right. It's not actual cash in his bank account yet.
Exactly. But the moment he clicks sell to generate cash for his other ventures, that gain is realized, and the state of residency takes its cut. So by moving to Miami, he fundamentally alters that equation.
Because Florida has no state income tax.
Right. And crucially, it is one of the few states that does not impose any state capital gains tax. It is literally zero.
And the execution of this was surgical. He establishes his residency in Florida. Then, in February 2024, the floodgates open. He executes the first major block of those stock sales.
And the numbers are staggering.
Yeah, he liquidates 24 million shares of Amazon for over $4 billion. And then a few days later, he liquidates another 12 million shares for $2 billion.
So in the span of a couple of weeks, he converts $6 billion of paper wealth into liquid cash.
Exactly. And because he executed those specific sales while legally residing in a zero-tax jurisdiction, he bypassed that new 7% Washington levy completely.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, when you extrapolate that math across the full 50 million shares he outlined in his trading plan, That simple geographic pivot from the Pacific Northwest to the Atlantic coast preserves roughly $600 million in capital.
Wow. Over $500 million.
Yeah, more than $500 million of value retained, essentially through administrative optimization.
It's the ultimate geographic arbitrage. But what fascinates me is how this connects to his foundational psychology. Bezos has famously operated on this concept he calls the regret minimization framework.
Right, the whole reason he started Amazon.
Exactly. The story goes that he was imagining himself at 80 years old, looking back, and realizing he would regret not participating in the internet boom far more than he would regret failing at a startup.
It's a very logical, almost algorithmic way of processing emotion.
Yeah. And we're seeing that exact same algorithmic thinking applied to his personal wealth. Why surrender $600 million to a brand new state tax if a fully legal geographic solution exists to retain it? I mean, it's ruthlessly efficient.
It is. It's the application of corporate efficiency models to personal existence. He treats his capital as fuel for his wider ambitions, which we'll get to in a bit. But before we look at the industrial and cosmic applications of that wealth, we have to look at the physical footprint it creates on Earth.
Right.
Because when you optimize your capital to this extreme degree, the assets you acquire really push the boundaries of modern engineering.
Right. And that brings us to the Koru.
Right.
Because once you've secured $500 million in tax savings, what does the physical manifestation of that wealth actually look like?
It looks like a custom-built $500 million super yacht.
Yeah, just the biggest boat you can imagine.
The Koru is an absolute marvel of naval architecture. It was delivered by the highly secretive Dutch shipbuilder Oshakong in 2023. And we are talking about a vessel that is 127 meters long.
Which is, what, over 400 feet?
417 feet. To put that in perspective, that is significantly longer than a standard American football field floating on the water.
That is absurd.
It features a midnight blue hull, classic lines, and 3 towering masts. It is currently the second largest sailing yacht on the planet. And the acquisition cost is just the entry ticket. I mean, the maritime industry estimates a vessel of this complexity carries an annual operating and maintenance cost of around $30 million.
$30 million a year, just to keep it floated and staffed. But, here is where the story gets really illustrative of the friction between this level of hyperwealth and the physical constraints of the old world.
Oh, the bridge incident.
Yes.
Yeah.
Because building a 417-foot yacht with 3 massive masts presents a unique logistical nightmare, specifically just getting it out of the shipyard and into the open ocean.
Yeah, the Rotterdam Bridge incident is fascinating. So Oceanco's shipyards are located inland in the Netherlands. To reach the North Sea, the Koru had to navigate a series of waterways.
Right.
And this included passing under the Koningshaven Bridge, locally known as De Hef. This is a historic steel railway bridge dating back to the late 19th century.
It's a major landmark.
Very much so. It's a beloved national monument that was heavily damaged during World War II and lovingly restored. The problem was pure geometry.
Let me guess. The boat was too tall.
Exactly. The clearance of the bridge, even at its maximum height, was simply not tall enough to accommodate the massive masts of Bezos' new yacht.
So the initial plan proposed by the shipbuilder was to literally dismantle the central span of this historic bridge. Just like take it apart, float the yacht through, and put the bridge back together.
Yeah, they offered to cover all the costs, obviously.
Obviously. But the public reaction was instantaneous and fierce.
It was a fascinating collision of systems. You have the boundless capital of the new tech elite crashing directly into the entrenched heritage and infrastructure of European history.
Right. The locals were not having it.
The citizens of Rotterdam were outraged. They organized protests. There were viral campaigns threatening to pelt the yacht with rotten eggs as it passed.
Rotten eggs. That's amazing.
Yeah, because the bridge had been renovated a few years prior with a promise from the city council that it would never be dismantled again. So the public viewed the proposal as an unacceptable concession to billionaire entitlement, regardless of who was paying for the operation.
And the backlash was so intense that Oceanco had to completely abandon the dismantling plan. The optics were just terrible.
So what did they do?
So instead, they resorted to this highly secretive, middle-of-the-night operation. They had to tow the massive hull of the Koru without its masts attached to the canals under the cover of darkness to a secondary shipyard closer to the sea.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and only there, free from the constraints of historic bridges, could the masts finally be stepped and installed. It's a perfect metaphor, really. The wealth just outgrew the infrastructure designed to contain it.
That's a great way to put it. And that theme of outgrowing constraints extends to the operation of the yacht itself. Because the Koru is a sailing vessel, its deck space is heavily dedicated to the mechanics of sailing, right? The rigging, the sails, the winches.
Right, which takes up a lot of room.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that design choice means there's no physical space to safely land a helicopter.
Which, at this tier of wealth, is an unacceptable logistical bottleneck. I mean, you can't have a mega yacht without a helicopter. So what do you do if you can't land your helicopter on your $500 million boat?
You buy a second boat.
You buy a second, slightly smaller boat whose sole purpose is to follow you around.
Right, the shadow vessel. It's called the Abiona, and it's a 75-meter or 246-foot yacht in its own right.
Which is huge.
In any other context, the Abiona would be considered a massive luxury super yacht. But in Bezos' fleet, it functions essentially as a floating garage and logistics hub.
It just follows the Koru around.
It shadows the Koru wherever it goes. It houses the fully enclosed helipad for Bezos and his guests, like his fiancée Lauren Sanchez. It carries the relief crew, the spare supplies, the personal submarines, the high-speed tenders.
Imagine your car is so big you need a second car driving behind it just to carry your luggage and your bicycle. Except the cars are the size of office buildings.
It's hard to wrap your head around.
It really is. But, looking at all this, the $500 million yacht, the $30 million shadow vessel, the massive carbon footprint of moving these assets around the globe, how does this reconcile with the Bezos Earth Fund?
Right, his climate initiative.
Yeah, he's committed $10 billion to fighting climate change. The sources outline this tension clearly. I mean, with controversies around the bridge and wealth inequality, does this level of conspicuous consumption hurt his ability to lead globally? How does a hyper-analytical mind rationalize that dichotomy?
Well, from an analytical standpoint, it's crucial to understand how wealth at this magnitude isolates the individual from traditional notions of contradiction. The sources indicate that in the operational framework of a centibillionaire, these two realities, massive personal consumption and massive philanthropic allocation, they don't cancel each other out.
Okay, so how do they view it?
They simply exist on parallel tracks. The argument typically made at this tier of influence is one of net impact calculation. The belief is that the $10 billion injected into climate science, decarbonization technologies, and policy reform will yield systemic global changes that far outweigh the localized carbon footprint of a private aviation or maritime fleet.
So it's a math problem to them.
It's an engineered ledger. They view the personal footprint as a fixed operational cost of maintaining their lifestyle and security, while the philanthropy is leveraged to change the global system. Now, whether the broader public accepts that mathematical rationalization is entirely subjective, but mechanistically, that is how the paradox is maintained.
When you look at that level of optimization on Earth, like optimizing tax codes, optimizing maritime engineering, just to build the biggest boat the oceans can physically handle, it almost feels like the planet itself becomes a constraint.
Absolutely.
Like physically, Earth just runs out of room, both infrastructurally and optically, for this scale of ambition.
And that psychological threshold is exactly where the modern space race begins. When terrestrial mechanics become too limiting, the next logical vector for expansion is orbital. Which brings us to the most fiercely contested arena of Bezos' current era, the billionaire space race.
Yes. This is where the story shifts from earthbound luxury to existential civilizational engineering. For the last 2 decades, the private spaceflight sector has been quietly and then very loudly exploding.
Right. It's not just NASA or Roscosmos anymore.
Exactly. The narrative has been driven by the personal capital and the deeply held ideologies of a few key individuals. And by the late 2010s, this really solidified into a 3-way contest. You've got Richard Branson with Virgin Galactic, Elon Musk with SpaceX, and Jeff Bezos with Blue Origin.
The big three.
But what the sources make abundantly clear is that they are not all running toward the same finish line. Their fundamental philosophies of what space is actually for are radically divergent.
That divergence is the key to understanding the entire industry. So let's break down the paradigms. You have Richard Branson. His historical focus with Virgin Galactic has been the democratization of the astronaut experience.
Meaning space tourism?
Specifically, yes, space tourism. His architecture is designed for suborbital flights. The goal is to build a commercial space line where paying customers board a spaceplane, fly to the edge of space, experience a few minutes of microgravity, see the curvature of the Earth against the blackness of space, and glide back down to a runway.
So it is an experiential model. It's the ultimate roller coaster ride.
Exactly. But then you look at Elon Musk and SpaceX, and the paradigm shifts entirely. Musk is driven by a deep-seated, almost existential dread regarding the fragility of Earth.
He talks about that a lot.
He does. He looks at history, looks at the potential for asteroid strikes or nuclear war, and concludes that having all of humanity on one planet is a single point of failure. His entire mission statement is to make humanity a multiplanetary species.
He wants to colonize Mars.
Right. Everything SpaceX builds, from the Falcon 9 to the massive Starship, is ultimately a mechanism to carry millions of tons of cargo and people to the Martian surface. It's essentially a lifeboat strategy.
Okay, so Branson wants a roller coaster, Musk wants a lifeboat. But Bezos' philosophy for Blue Origin is fundamentally different from both of those models.
Very different. Bezos does not want to abandon Earth. He views Earth as the most beautiful, perfectly calibrated jewel in the solar system.
But he also sees a problem coming.
He recognizes the mathematical reality of exponential energy consumption. His thesis is that as human civilization requires more and more energy, we will eventually run up against the absolute thermodynamic limits of this planet. If we continue heavy industrialization on Earth, we destroy the biosphere.
So his solution isn't to leave, like Musk wants. His solution is to rezone.
Exactly. He wants to rezone Earth. His grand vision is to move all heavy, polluting, energy-intensive industries off the planet entirely.
Which is such a wild concept.
He envisions tapping into the virtually limitless resources of the solar system, right? Mining asteroids for rare metals, capturing solar energy in space 24/7 without any atmospheric interference.
And what happens to Earth in this scenario?
In his future, Earth becomes, in his own words, a huge national park. It is zoned strictly for residential living and light industry. The heavy lifting of human progress happens in orbital habitats, like massive spinning O'Neill cylinders, and industrial parks floating in the vacuum of space.
It's a staggering vision. I mean, Musk wants to build a backup hard drive on Mars, and Bezos wants to move the server racks into orbit so the Earth can be a garden.
That's a perfect analogy.
And it's important to contextualize that this modern era of private spaceflight didn't just emerge from a vacuum. Our sources trace the specific lineage back to the 1990s, heavily crediting figures like Peter Diamandis.
Right, the X Prize.
Yeah, he founded the Ansari X Prize, which offered $10 million to the first non-government organization to launch a reusable crewed spacecraft into space twice within 2 weeks.
And that prize was the catalyst. It was ultimately won in 2004 by a project called Tier 1, which built the spaceship-owned vehicle. And crucially, that project was heavily bankrolled by another tech billionaire, Microsoft co-founder Paul Allen.
Oh, interesting. So the Billionaire connection goes way back.
Exactly. The technology developed by Paul Allen's team was subsequently licensed by Richard Branson to form the foundation of Virgin Galactic. So the DNA of this current race has been interwoven with billionaire capital from the very beginning.
But while the roots are collaborative, the current reality is fiercely combative, particularly between Jeff Bezos and Elon Musk.
Oh, it's intense.
SpaceX versus Blue Origin is one of the most intense, petty, and highly consequential corporate rivalries of the 21st century. It is a clash of titans that plays out in federal courtrooms, in government procurement offices, and incredibly visibly on social media.
What's fascinating here is that the friction points are systemic because they are both competing for the exact same physical and economic bottlenecks required to reach orbit.
Like the launch pads.
Right. Let's look at the real estate battle. Over a decade ago, NASA announced it was going to lease out Launch Complex 39A at the Kennedy Space Center. This is historic, irreplaceable infrastructure.
That's where Apollo 11 launched, right?
Exactly. This is the exact pad where the Apollo 11 moon mission launched and where the space shuttles launched. It is perfectly situated for orbital trajectories. SpaceX bid for the exclusive lease.
And Bezos didn't like that.
No, Blue Origin, recognizing the strategic monopoly that would grant Musk, aggressively fought it. They filed formal protests and lawsuits arguing the pad should be a multi-user facility.
But SpaceX ultimately won that lease, and they control it today. And that legal wrangling really set the tone for everything that followed, because in 2014, the battle shifted from physical real estate to intellectual property.
A patent dispute.
Yes, SpaceX filed a lawsuit to invalidate a highly specific patent that Blue Origin had been granted. The patent covered the mechanics of landing a reusable rocket booster vertically on a platform at sea.
And this touches on the core economics of modern spaceflight. The holy grail of lowering launch costs is reusability. If you throw away the rocket every time, space is too expensive. You have to land it.
Right.
SpaceX argued that the concept of retropropulsive vertical landings on ships had been discussed in academic papers and science fiction for decades. They said it was prior art, and therefore Blue Origin should not be allowed to patent the physics of it and charge licensing fees.
And SpaceX won that fight too, right?
They did. The patent was struck down, and that legal victory paved the way for SpaceX's now routine grown ship landings in the middle of the ocean.
And the animosity from these boardroom battles constantly spills over into public view. I mean, the Twitter, now X, spats are legendary.
They are very entertaining.
In late 2015, Blue Origin achieved a massive milestone. They launched their New Shepard rocket past the Kármán line, which is the recognized boundary of space, and successfully landed the booster vertically back on the landing pad in Texas.
It was an incredible piece of engineering.
It was. And Bezos tweeted a video of the landing, clearly very proud of it.
But Elon Musk immediately seized the opportunity to contextualize the achievement. He pointed out the vast fundamental physics gap between what Blue Origin did and what SpaceX was trying to do.
He kind of belittled it.
Yeah, Musk publicly mocked the celebration. He noted that New Shepard performed a suborbital hop, meaning going straight up and straight down, reaching speeds of maybe Mach 3. But to achieve actual orbit, to stay in space, a rocket must accelerate sideways to roughly Mach 25.
Which is way harder.
The thermal and kinetic energy requirements are exponentially higher. Musk was essentially saying, cute suborbital toy, but it's not orbital rocketry.
Which perfectly set the stage for Bezos' retaliation just 1 month later. Because in December 2015, SpaceX pulled off an even harder feat. They launched a Falcon 9 on an actual orbital mission, delivering satellites into space, and then successfully landed the first stage booster back at Cape Canaveral.
Historic moment.
It was historic. And Bezos famously tweeted, "Congrats SpaceX on landing Falcon's suborbital booster stage. Welcome to the club."
It was a masterful deployment of passive aggression. By technically referring to the Falcon 9's first stage as suborbital, because only the second stage actually reaches orbit, he equated SpaceX's monumental orbital achievement with Blue Origin's much simpler vertical hop.
Basically implying, yeah, we already did that.
Exactly, implying Blue Origin had already been there and done that. It really highlights the intensely personal ego embedded in this industrial race.
But the stakes of this rivalry are far higher than social media clout. Because while they trade barbs online, they are fiercely competing to become the primary logistics providers for the United States government.
What's fascinating here is how government money fuels this private rivalry. The Billionaire rivalry has essentially become the backbone of NASA's deep space strategy.
Tell me about the Artemis program.
Right, so this is best illustrated by NASA's Artemis program, which is the initiative to return humans to the lunar surface. To do this, NASA needed a human landing system, the vehicle that actually descends from lunar orbit to the moon's surface.
And they put out a call for bids?
Yes. And in April 2021, after a highly competitive bidding process, NASA awarded a single, exclusive $2.9 billion contract to SpaceX to modify their Starship vehicle into the lunar lander.
And Blue Origin was not happy.
Blue Origin, who had submitted a competing bid with a consortium of legacy aerospace companies, was furious. They argued that NASA was supposed to pick two providers to ensure redundancy. So Bezos' company filed a massive lawsuit in federal court against the U.S. government, claiming the procurement process was flawed.
Which effectively halted all work on the Artemis lander while the lawyers fought it out.
It did. Blue Origin ultimately lost that lawsuit in late 2021, and SpaceX was allowed to proceed. But Blue Origin's sheer persistence is remarkable. They didn't fold.
They kept pushing.
They didn't. And that persistence eventually leveraged the government's own desire for dissimilar redundancy. That's the aerospace engineering concept, that you never want to rely on a single system or a single contractor in case they fail.
Makes sense.
So 2 years later, in May 2023, NASA essentially validated Blue Origin's initial complaint. They announced they wanted competition, and they awarded Blue Origin their own $3.4 billion contract to develop a second, completely separate lunar lander called Blue Moon.
So they both get to build one.
Exactly. So the current reality is that the United States government is actively funding both Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos to build competing vehicles to carry the next astronauts to the moon. The rivalry has been fully institutionalized.
It's incredible. But, while SpaceX and Blue Origin were battling over the moon, there was another, much more immediate and highly personal race happening, the suborbital tourism race between Blue Origin and Virgin Galactic.
The race to put the founders themselves into space.
Exactly. For years, the development timelines of Branson's Spaceship 2 and Bezos's New Shepard capsule were running in parallel. Both faced severe technical hurdles and delays. But it all culminated in a razor-thin sprint in the summer of 2021.
Branson really pushed for that one.
He did. Richard Branson, sensing Blue Origin was close, accelerated his schedule and managed to fly aboard his own vehicle, the VSS Unity, on July 11th, 2021.
And Bezos.
Just 9 days later, on July 20th, which happens to be the anniversary of the Apollo 11 moon landing, Jeff Bezos strapped into the New Shepard for the NS-16 mission and crossed the Kármán line into space, 9 days apart.
It was a very tight turnaround.
You cannot look at that timeline and tell me the scheduling wasn't driven by pure, unfiltered competitive ego.
It was an extraordinary week for the optics of commercial spaceflight, that's for sure. However, if we evaluate the trajectories of those two companies from that July 2021 flashpoint to the present day, the contrast is stark.
Completely.
Blue Origin used that suborbital success as a stepping stone. They are currently pushing massive capital into the development of the New Glenn, a heavy-lift orbital rocket designed to break SpaceX's monopoly on heavy payloads. They are building a serious, diversified industrial base with lunar landers and orbital reef space stations.
While Virgin Galactic, well, they've really struggled to maintain momentum. Despite completing commercial flights, the economics of their air-launched spaceplane model have proven difficult to scale.
Yeah, Branson actually stepped back a bit.
He did. In late 2023, Richard Branson publicly stated he wasn't going to invest any more of his personal wealth into the company. He noted he had already put in $1 billion and felt the company needed to survive on its own revenues.
Right.
It really feels like the financial air went out of the Virgin balloon, while Blue Origin is just throttling up.
That divergence highlights a fundamental difference in capitalization. Bezos possesses an economic engine that Branson simply does not. I mean, Bezos has been routinely selling billions of dollars of Amazon stock, exactly like those optimized Miami trades we discussed, specifically to fund Blue Origin to the tune of over $1 billion a year.
So he's treating it like infrastructure, not a startup.
Exactly. He treats Blue Origin not as a business that needs near-term profitability, but as an infrastructure investment in the deep future. He has the seemingly bottomless liquidity required to sustain the massive, decades-long capital expenditure of orbital rocketry.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though. Amid all this talk of billions of dollars orbital mechanics and ruthlessly optimized engineering, there's a detail in the sources that completely undercuts the image of Bezos as this cold, data-driven cyborg.
Oh, the boots.
Yes, he is a superstition. Back in September 2011, during the very early days, Blue Origin was testing an uncrewed prototype vehicle. It encountered a flight instability and was destroyed during the test.
It was a massive setback for them.
It was. And ever since that specific failure, to every single rocket launch, Jeff Bezos wears a specific pair of lucky Texas cowboy boots. He considers them a talisman. I find that fascinating.
It humanizes him, for sure.
It shows that even when your entire life is governed by fluid dynamics and regret minimization algorithms, when you are strapping highly explosive liquid hydrogen to a metal tube, human psychology still craves a little bit of luck.
It's a compelling reminder of the human operating system running beneath all this technology, and understanding that specific operating system, the way he organizes human behavior, data flow, and decision-making, is exactly what we need to examine to understand how his empire functions.
Because you can't just wing it.
Right. You don't scale a bookstore into the infrastructure of the internet while simultaneously running a space program without a highly specific cultural methodology.
Exactly. So let's look at the underlying code of his brain. Because Amazon isn't just a massive retailer or a cloud provider. It is a codified methodology. And the absolute cornerstone of that methodology is the concept of day one.
The day one philosophy is perhaps the most heavily analyzed corporate doctrine of the modern era. Its origins date back to 1997, when Amazon issued its very first letter to public shareholders.
And he laid it all out there.
He did. In that document, Bezos meticulously outlined his core operating principles. A relentless, almost irrational focus on the customer over the competitor. A commitment to making bold investment bets. and a refusal to sacrifice long-term value creation for short-term Wall Street earnings.
Right.
He concluded that inaugural letter by stating, "This is day one for the internet, and if we execute well, for Amazon.com."
And he didn't just write it once and frame it in the lobby. He proceeded to attach a verbatim copy of that original 1997 letter to every single annual shareholder letter he wrote for the next 24 years. It became an obsessive mantra.
Because day one is not a platitude, it's an operational mandate. It requires maintaining the nimbleness, the hypervelocity decision-making, and the extreme tolerance for experimental failure that characterizes a startup operating out of a garage, even when your company employs 1.5 million people and dominates global logistics.
It's an engineered state of perpetual urgency.
Exactly.
And the reason he enforces this urgency is because of what happens if you lose it. In a later shareholder letter, someone asked him the logical follow-up question, what does day two look like?
His response was chillingly clinical.
It was. He wrote, day two is stasis, followed by irrelevant, followed by excruciating painful decline, followed by death. And that is why it is always day one. I mean, it's like owning a house. If you aren't actively fixing it up, which is day one, it is actively rotting around you, which is day two.
It's a profound recognition of institutional entropy. In physics, entropy dictates that any closed system will naturally degrade from order to disorder unless energy is constantly applied. Corporate systems are the same.
So day two isn't about laziness.
No, day two isn't about executives suddenly becoming lazy. It's about the natural accumulation of bureaucratic friction. It is akin to technical debt in software engineering. If you aren't aggressively refactoring your code to adapt to new hardware and new realities, the system naturally ossifies. Bezos engineered a culture designed to constantly burn away that organizational technical debt. There is no plateau. You are either actively inventing or you are actively dying.
And that relentless drive to invent is what allowed them to birth massive innovations like Amazon Web Services out of an online bookstore. But what is critical to understand is how that operational code has survived even after Bezos stepped back from the daily mechanics.
Right, the transition of power.
In July 2021, he transitioned from CEO to executive chairman, handing the reins to Andy Jassy, the architect who built AWS into a juggernaut.
And Jassy is fundamentally a product of that day one environment. He has taken the core code and evolved it. If you analyze Jassy's 2024 shareholder letter, he highlights a specific manifestation of this culture, the culture of asking why.
The why culture.
Yes. He writes about how maintaining their edge requires a relentless, institutionalized interrogation of the status quo. He details the questions they force their teams to ask. Things like, why does this customer experience have to be this way? Why can't it be better? What are the perceived constraints and why must we accept them? Why can't we invent around that friction?
It is a systematic refusal to accept the phrase because that's how it's always been done. And that why culture is the exact mechanism driving Amazon's current massive pivot into artificial intelligence.
It's driving everything right now.
Because when they asked why can't our systems be more intuitive, the answer led them directly into generative AI. In that same 2024 letter, Jassy addresses this boom. He states that if you believe every single customer experience will eventually be reinvented by AI, you must invest comprehensively at every layer of the technology stack.
Because of this culture, Amazon isn't just bolting a chatbot onto their website. They are currently building over 1,000 distinct generative AI applications across their entire ecosystem.
The scale is staggering. I mean, they are integrating generative models into the core shopping experience to synthesize reviews and answer specific product queries. They are deploying AI coding assistants like Amazon Q for their developers.
And it goes further than that.
Yeah, they are integrating AI into Alexa, into Prime Video recommendations, into the logistics routing of their delivery vans. But more importantly, true to their AWS origins, they are building the underlying infrastructure for everyone else's AI. Jassy refers to these as the primitives, the foundational digital Lego bricks that other companies use to build software.
Let's break down those primitives because that's where the real power lies. Most people associate the AI boom with NVIDIA and their incredibly powerful GPUs. But Amazon looked at that dependency, asked, why do we have to pay NVIDIA's margins, and decided to build their own custom silicon.
Wow, they just built their own chips.
Precisely. Training massive AI models requires immense computational power, traditionally handled by clusters of graphics processing units. But relying entirely on third-party hardware creates a supply chain bottleneck and compresses profit margins. So Amazon designed their own custom chips, specifically architected for machine learning.
Like the tranium chips.
Exactly. They developed chips like Trainium, which is optimized for the computationally heavy task of training models, and Inferentia, which is optimized for the process of running the model once it's trained.
So they just bypass NVIDIA altogether.
By offering these custom chips through AWS, they provide a more cost-effective alternative for developers, simultaneously controlling their own destiny and undercutting the broader hardware market. Additionally, they are developing their own proprietary frontier models, codenamed Amazon Noga, designed to compete directly with state-of-the-art models like GPT-4. They are attacking the AI ecosystem from the silicon up to the user interface.
Hold on, though. I have to look at the other side of this ledger. We are analyzing this day one operating system, this relentless asking of why, this high-velocity deployment of 1,000 AI models, and praising it as an unparalleled innovation engine.
Right.
But wait, doesn't this relentless drive come with a human cost? Reading through the sources, this exact same methodology sounds incredibly corrosive to the human beings operating within it. How does a system sustain that level of friction without just burning its human capital to ash?
It is the defining vulnerability of their model, and the sources document this friction extensively. The exact same psychological intensity that builds a multi-trillion-dollar empire generates a profoundly taxing, sometimes punishing, daily work environment.
Brad Stone wrote about this, right?
He did. Brad Stone, in his investigative book The Everything Store, captured the adversarial nature of Bezos's early leadership. The accounts describe a leader who leveraged conflict as a tool to test ideas, often resulting in incredibly harsh executive interactions.
Like calling people out in meetings.
Reports detailed him dismantling arguments by asking things like, "Did I take my stupid pills today?" or questioning if an employee was lazy or simply incompetent. The culture was deliberately designed to be confrontational, based on the belief that truth emerges from intense friction.
And that friction wasn't just isolated to highly compensated executives in Seattle boardrooms. It cascaded down the entire organizational chart, manifesting most visibly in the fulfillment centers.
The logistics network.
Yeah, the scale of Amazon's logistics network meant managing hundreds of thousands of hourly workers. And the reporting over the years highlighted grueling realities. Algorithmic tracking of time-off tasks, punishing productivity quotas, and a systemic feeling that human workers were being managed as if they were just slower, less efficient robots.
The optimization algorithms that made two-day shipping possible frequently clashed with the physiological limits of the workforce. It created a profound political vulnerability.
A vulnerability that eventually triggered direct legislative intervention. In 2018, Senator Bernie Sanders introduced a highly publicized piece of legislation, provocatively titled the Stop Bezos Act.
That was a major PR crisis for them.
It was. The mechanical goal of the bill was to force massive, profitable corporations like Amazon to pay a tax equivalent to the cost of the public assistance programs like food stamps and housing subsidies that their lowest-wage workers were relying on to survive.
Right, it was a targeted structural critique. The argument was that Amazon's immense profitability was being essentially subsidized by the taxpayer because the company wasn't paying a living wage.
And what's fascinating is that the pressure campaign actually forced a systemic change. The public relations damage from that proposed bill and the relentless media scrutiny surrounding working conditions led Amazon to unilaterally raise its minimum wage for all U.S. employees to $15 an hour shortly after. They adjusted the algorithm.
When you analyze this through the lens of organizational psychology, it is a textbook case study of the limitations of transformational leadership.
Explain that. What is transformational leadership?
This specific leadership theory posits that effective leaders rely on inspirational motivation, the ability to articulate a massive, compelling vision of the future, and intellectual stimulation, relentlessly pushing followers to innovate and challenge assumptions.
And Bezos is obviously a master of both of those.
Arguably one of the best. However, the theory also requires a third pillar, individualized consideration. That's the capacity to care for the well-being, fatigue, and personal development of the individual follower. Our sources suggest that applying individualized consideration across a workforce of over 1 million people, while simultaneously maintaining the extreme velocity of a day-one startup, creates massive systemic failure points.
So the system just breaks down at the human level.
The code that perfectly optimizes the supply chain struggles to optimize for human empathy.
It is the ultimate double-edged sword of his legacy. The code that built the empire is the exact same code that burns out the people running it. But what is truly wild is that Bezos himself hasn't slowed down. He utilized this exact day-one framework to conquer digital retail. He utilized it to dominate the infrastructure of the internet with AWS.
And now he's on to the next thing.
Right. Having stepped back from Amazon's daily operations, he isn't retiring. He has identified a new bottleneck. He is taking the massive potential of AI and aiming it squarely at the hardest, most stubborn sector of human progress.
Which brings us to the most recent developments and the culmination of his current trajectory. He is attempting to merge his deep understanding of artificial intelligence with his ambitions for physical engineering.
I was reading the recent financial filings on this, and the numbers are just staggering. In November 2025, the news broke that Jeff Bezos was officially stepping back into an active CEO role.
But not at Amazon.
Not returning to Amazon, no, but taking the helm of a brand new, highly secretive startup called Project Prometheus. He co-founded this venture with Vic Bezos, a prominent former executive from Google's life sciences division. And this wasn't a quiet beta launch in a garage.
Not at all.
By June 2026, Prometheus announced they had raised a mind-bending $12 billion in a Series B funding round. $12 billion, catapulting the company to a valuation of $41 billion before they had even released a public product.
A $12 billion Series B is a financial anomaly. It signals that the institutional capital markets believe Prometheus is attacking a problem of unprecedented scale.
So what are they actually doing?
The mission statement reflects that scale. Prometheus is attempting to build what they categorize as artificial general engineers. Their objective is to take the deeply complex, incredibly slow processes of physical design, simulation, and manufacturing and convert them entirely into end-to-end machine learning processes.
Okay, to really grasp the mechanics of what they are attempting, we have to look at the specific example Bezos outlined in his recent CNBC interview. He used the aerospace industry, specifically the design of a next-generation jet engine.
That's a perfect example.
Currently, designing a new turbine engine is one of the most complex human endeavors on Earth. It requires a highly coordinated team of roughly 1,000 specialized engineers, experts in thermodynamics, fluid dynamics, metallurgy, and they're working continuously for over 10 years.
It's a massive undertaking.
They design a component, physically machine a prototype, put it in a massive testing cell, run it, measure the failure points, and then go back to the drawing board. It is a decade-long loop of physical trial and error.
And the goal of Prometheus is to compress that decade-long physical loop into a single year or potentially weeks of computational simulation.
Weeks instead of 10 years.
Exactly. They want to use highly advanced AI to accurately simulate all the interacting physics, the heat dispersion, the airflow, the material fatigue inside a digital environment. If the AI can iterate and test millions of designs virtually and only output the perfectly optimized final schematic to be manufactured, you effectively eliminate the 10-year bottleneck of physical prototyping.
And if they pull that off, the economic implications are massive. Because they aren't just targeting jet engines, they are targeting the entire physical economy. Manufacturing, industrial construction, automotive design, heavy agriculture.
It's everything we interact with.
Vic Bezos pointed out in their prospectus that the physical economy represents approximately 60% of global GDP. That is a $70 trillion market. It is the vast, heavy, labor-intensive bulk of human civilization that has fundamentally missed out on the exponential productivity gains that the software industry has enjoyed over the last 20 years.
Right, because software updates overnight, but physical infrastructure takes decades.
Prometheus wants to make the physical world update like software. But wait, looking at that $41 billion valuation, my immediate thought is, why is this unique to Bezos?
That's the billion-dollar question.
Right. Because we just spent the last year watching OpenAI, Google, and Anthropic release massive, incredibly smart AI models. Why can't OpenAI or Google just do this with ChatGPT? Why can't a company just take ChatGPT, feed it a textbook on aerodynamics, and ask it to design a jet engine? What is the $41 billion secret sauce that Prometheus has?
It comes down to the architecture of the data. The foundation models we interact with daily, the large language models, are trained primarily on semantic data. They scrape billions of parameters of text, code, and imagery from the open internet.
They read Wikipedia, Reddit, stuff like that.
Exactly. They read digitized books. They learn to predict the next word in a sequence based on human language patterns. But physical engineering is not semantic. It is deterministic.
Okay, what does that mean in practice?
It means you cannot scrape the proprietary fluid dynamics of a Boeing turbine from a public website. You cannot scrape the microscopic thermal tolerances of an Intel semiconductor fabrication plant from the internet. That highly specific empirical physics data does not exist on the open web. It is locked inside the secure servers of legacy industrial companies.
Ah. So Prometheus isn't just trying to build a slightly smarter algorithm. They are actively building proprietary data sets of real-world physics that the standard tech giants simply do not possess.
They're building an economic moat constructed entirely out of applied physics data.
Wow.
Precisely. They are likely running millions of physical simulations, partnering with industrial giants to ingest decades of highly classified testing data, and training their neural networks to predict physical outcomes rather than linguistic outcomes. It is a fundamentally different architecture of artificial intelligence.
And this technological leap ties directly back into a much broader, almost philosophical argument Bezos has been making regarding the future of AI and the global workforce.
Yes, his civilizational wealth theory.
Right now, the dominant cultural narrative around AI is driven by fear. The fear that AI will automate white-collar and engineering jobs, leading to mass unemployment and economic collapse. But Bezos approaches this from the exact opposite perspective. He points to historical macroeconomic trends and discusses the concept of civilizational wealth.
His argument is rooted in the history of industrial revolutions. He posits that human wealth is not generated by hoarding static resources. It is generated purely by invention. He uses the historical examples of the plow and the steam engine.
How does the plow fit into this?
While before the plow, humanity spent nearly all its caloric energy simply securing food. The invention of the plow drastically increased agricultural yield while requiring less human labor. This didn't cause mass starvation due to unemployed farmers. It freed up human capital to invent other things, raising the aggregate wealth of the civilization. The steam engine did the exact same thing for physical labor and transportation.
So his thesis is that if Prometheus successfully uses AI to accelerate the invention loop, if we can design zero-emission engines or nuclear fusion reactors in months instead of decades, we won't run out of jobs.
No, we will actually experience severe labor scarcity.
Wait, really?
Scarcity.
Yes, because the AI will generate so many viable, revolutionary schematics for new infrastructure, new vehicles, and new technologies that we physically will not have enough human beings or robotic systems to manufacture them all. The bottleneck shifts from human engineering capacity to sheer material production.
It is a radically optimistic view of technological disruption. And it raises an important question for anyone analyzing their own industry. If the premise of Prometheus holds true, and the cycle time from conceptual idea to a fully engineered, manufacturable physical product shrinks from a decade to a matter of months, how does the fundamental structure of your specific field change?
When the friction of physical design is removed, progress is limited only by our capacity to physically build what the machines design for us. It entirely rewires the mechanics of the global supply chain.
It is a wild concept to wrap your head around, but it perfectly encapsulates the entire journey we've taken today. I mean, we started by examining a man who applied a highly calculated regret minimization framework to launch a digital bookstore from a garage. We saw how he engineered the day one operating system, ruthlessly demanding velocity and asking why, to scale that bookstore into a logistics empire and the foundational cloud infrastructure of the internet.
We then analyzed how the unprecedented personal wealth generated by that system, wealth capable of deploying $500 million maritime assets and executing perfectly timed multi-hundred-million-dollar tax optimizations, has been systematically funneled into Blue Origin. We examined the fierce billionaire-driven mechanics of the space race, driven by a desire to preserve Earth by moving heavy industry into orbit.
And now, returning to the arena with Project Prometheus, he is marshaling billions in venture capital to attack the very friction of the physical world. When you step back and look at his entire life, from pioneering one-click purchasing to eliminate retail friction, to building reusable rockets to eliminate launch friction, to now building AI to eliminate engineering friction, Jeff Bezos' entire career is essentially one massive, relentless exercise in compressing time.
It is the unifying theory of his operations. He views time and physical friction as inefficiencies to be engineered out of existence, whether in digital retail, orbital mechanics, or human invention.
As we wrap up this deep dive, I want you to consider how that core day one operating system might apply to the systems in your own life. Think about the processes you interact with daily. Are you allowing them to slowly accumulate technical debt and slip into the stasis of day two? Or are you applying that Andy Jassy philosophy, constantly interrogating your environment and asking, why does this have to be this way?
It remains a highly potent framework for driving change, provided it is deployed with an awareness of the human constraints we analyzed earlier.
Absolutely. Now, I want to leave you with one final provocative thought to mull over, building directly on the implications of Prometheus. If Bezos and this new wave of industrial AI truly succeed in turning physical engineering into a rapid, digitally simulated software problem, the implications go far beyond faster jet engines.
I do.
We are potentially looking at a future where the physical structures that define our reality, our transportation networks, our architecture, the very layout of our cities, begin to evolve, mutate, and upgrade at the frantic, chaotic pace of the internet. So the lingering question is this. When the physical world around you updates as fast as your smartphone, how will human psychology adapt to an environment that never stays the same?
That is a staggering implication for the future of human adaptation.
There really is. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Stay curious, keep asking why, and we'll catch you on the next one.